Okay.
And we're live. Welcome to our fourth Serious Brandy interview. This with David Othenin-Girard from K&L Wines in California. David is the spirits buyer for K&L and works out of the Hollywood, California office. As a disclaimer, I want to say that when I lived in LA, I did freelance blogging for K&L's website, but I haven't done that since I moved for about a year. I'm really excited to have David here. He is a friend, but he's also one of the people that really was responsible for getting me into brandy and serious brandy at that. So David, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Steve. Anything for our serious brandy friends. A lot of these guys I think I know, not all of them, but I'm really glad to be here.
So you've been in retail spirits for a long time now. When did you first get into that business?
I came into the retail side right after college, a degree in economics that I didn't want to use and or couldn't figure out how to use, and was already interested in wine and spirits. So I was probably 21, 22, right out of school, and somehow stumbled upon retail and got a job at a prominent LA wine shop some time ago. 2004, 2005-ish, if I remember. I don't know, I have no memories. And about a year after that, their spirits buyer left, and I took over. So yeah, the rest is history. I mean, sometime after that, maybe three years after that, I jumped over to K&L just as a wine salesperson, and same deal. A year after that, their spirits person left, and I was, along with David Driscoll, who I founded the program with many years ago. We really decided to try and do something different, and yeah, that was almost 10 years ago now. So
David Driscoll was your corresponding spirits buyer in Northern California.
Yeah, we were hired both on sales side, wine sales side, literally within weeks of each other. And when the spirits buyer left, we were both hired as the replacement. So together we kind of built the single barrel program, and of course, his blogging made a huge dent on the industry, which was pretty, I would say, closed previously, and he was really one of the first voices to talk from the inside about how it worked. And at the same time, we were going to Scotland, going to Mexico, and eventually started going to France, where what is, I think no one can argue, the brandy capital of the world.
Well, let's talk about that, because so in the early 2010s, yeah, you guys went to Scotland, you went to Kentucky. Whiskey was huge then, but then around January 2012, you guys went to France. Brandy was not huge in the US. In fact, there was almost no market for that kind of brandy. Whose idea was that first trip, and how did that come to pass?
Yeah, I mean, there's just one man we can thank for it. It's Mr. Charles Neal. I mean, he's been a voice, proponent of brandy for years, decades, really now. And it was clear at that point that brown spirits in general were going to be having a renaissance. While we had already, we had always sold a decent amount of brandy to sort of like what I would call the classic customer, people, Francophiles, people who are really into food and had been to Paris and maybe had a great cognac or Armagnac at the end of their dinner or what have you. So there was a small group of people interested in that. And, we got excited to read Charles's books and learn more about what that meant. And really, I think seeing the industry, I mean, brandy's always been something that I've really enjoyed just personally, but seeing sort of the industry, the way cognac and Armagnac are marketed to us, I think felt that there was really a lot out there that we weren't experiencing. And so just out of pure curiosity and personal interest, Charles sort of had been running these trips for his clients, oftentimes just wine based, because he's primarily a wine importer, even though he started in spirits. The wine is a much bigger part of his business than the spirits ever was. So he leads these tours to visit his producers, because it's a great way to endear your customers to your products, is to show the people who behind them. And Charles has a very sort of specific ideology about who he chooses to bring in and why. And it's about, it's a lot about family. It's a lot about, quality and consistency. And so these are really cool trips to be on. And so he, basically invited us on a trip, and, it's like, meet on this day in Paris, and I'll pick you up, swoop you up. And yeah, that's it. And the rest is history. And we had pretty good success that first year, even early on. And it became clear that there was, not only was Armagnac this completely untapped reservoir of incredible old products, that the whole region in general was totally unexplored and underdeveloped, because what we knew about it was what the marketers had told us about. It's that, Cognac is the biggest enigma of the group. I mean, Armagnac, is hidden because Armagnac is hidden because it is rural and it's hard to get to, but Cognac is obfuscated in a way that few of our other categories really are. So it was a really interesting, nut to crack. And so we really fell in love quickly.
So let's talk about Charles Neal for a minute, because he has been, shouting about brandy for decades. And he's one of the biggest authorities. For people who don't know, he's an importer, a distributor from Northern California. He's written two of, I think, the best English language books on brandy, one about Armagnac and one about Calvados. And did he decide where you were going, or did you work? How did you decide on that first trip where you would visit?
Absolutely. Those first trips, he was in complete control. I think, he's a businessman. So he's asking us, okay, what do you guys want to see? He's also got his favorite producers. That first year we went and saw all the Charles Neal specials, the big boys, Boignier. We had Pigeon with Madame Lafitte, and in her little apartment. And we went to Ravignon. We went to, of course, Pelleau, which is right outside of the town where his family lives. And a number of these class producers, and then a few of his favorites that he doesn't regularly import. It's funny, you go around Armagnac and without Charles Neal, and you can stop into almost any producer and you go, oh, are you imported into the United States? And they're inevitably, they'll be like, yes, of course, our importer is Charles Neal. And you're like, okay. I mean, because he's been bringing in small batches for other stores for years. I mean, there's a store in NorCal called D&M that's done good stuff with Charles, and they have I believe they still have a brandy club that they run, and there's pretty early adopters over there, and a couple of bars that have really embraced it. So there's, it's not just K&L for sure. That first year was really him. And then as we started to go back, we kind of, we're doing some research, we're asking to see certain properties, we're doing other things. And then subsequently I started going, I'm lucky I can speak French. So I started going back. I've been back a couple of times now without Charles, or doing some separate stuff from Charles, because, he's got his people, and there's certainly other people out there that don't work with Charles. So that was definitely something that we looked at as well.
And once you came back from that first trip, and you brought in a lot of brandy from that first trip, how did it go initially? Was it slow going at first? Did it take off at a certain point? Like how did it sell?
I think we brought a lot of different stuff, but we were pretty conservative. And the great thing about brandy is that it's not like Scotland, where you're like, you got to if you want something, you can take the cask. In Armagnac, partly because of the way it's produced, but also because, they're not really selling that much on the regular, and mostly they sell to bulk suppliers who are going to give them bottom dollar. We're buying like, X VAT, and it's a good business for them. So they're cool if we say, hey, we want 60 or 90 bottles of this or that. And it's a good thing for them. Whereas for most spirits producers, an order like that would be a waste of their time. I mean, these are really small scale producers. So we took a lot of different things from different producers in relatively small quantities. And I think at that time we were still really selling to the traditional brandy. It was before the whiskey guys had sort of gotten fed up with bourbon and started looking elsewhere. And so we were kind of trying to suss out what the market wanted. And there was, even back then, there was sort of like, we probably turned down some stuff that today we would have been able to sell because, oh, it's too oaky or it's too powerful or too rich. And the customers won't want that. Even though maybe I enjoyed it, it's like, how do we sell this stuff? And, because in France, a lot of the stuff that we really like, the producers really don't, or certainly the cognoscenti there find the heavily oaked brandies to be essentially, not flawed per se, but outside of the norm, and certainly not in the style that would be acceptable to sell to a high-end retailer in Paris or some other, city. So it was an interesting transformation over the years. But yeah, it sold well. The wine people really respond, especially to Gascogne and Calvados, because we have a great clientele for wine, and a lot of those people have had those experiences where they remember being at a great restaurant in Bordeaux or something like that, and someone served them a 78 whatever it is, d'Artigalon or De Rose or one of these big names, and they have this incredible experience. So it's really easy to sort of talk about it in that context of like, these spirits are really a terroir driven sense of place. They don't exist anywhere else, and that's a story that my customers have always really responded to. So yeah, it was successful, and we just kept going back every year, sometimes twice actually. So
there's an image I think a lot of us have in our head, especially of Armagnac, that when people go there, like distributors or folks like you, you're knocking on these old farmhouse cottages and finding barrels buried in basements that no one's touched for a long time or even thought about. How accurate is that, and what are the different sort of models that you've seen when you've been there?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a part of that. The most of the stuff that we bring in through Charles and those guys are sort of the next level up from those true basement finds. In the terms of these are people who are commercializing Armagnac already. They have a label. They may have a small clientele, a familial clientele, or just people who have traveled there before, who come back every year or every other year, and those are who they're selling to, people who walk in the shop. So they're maybe not they're maybe not like selling that much Armagnac, but they survive on the people coming in, and then the rest of their farming is done in to make ends meet, and they're planting all sorts of other things. And so those people who have a good knowledge of what sort of Armagnac drinkers like, they're kind of prepared. They'll have pulled samples set aside, and labels with vintages on them and stuff like that. Occasionally you'll walk in to a place and there'll be like no tasting room, often you're in like someone's living room, but not even like an area set up with glasses and stuff like that. And they'll taste you just from the barrel. But that's pretty rare. Those guys really we don't have really a good way to commercialize those products, because if they're not doing any of their own bottling, then they're not really, then they have to contract the bottling, and it's just not really in our wheelhouse. So we're kind of in the tier above that, and within that there's a huge variety of different types of producers. You do have the true farm producer who is cultivating a small amount of wine and distilling. Some of them own their own stills, but most of them use their itinerant distillers, and that can be good and bad. Of course, distillation is a science, and it's an art, and sometimes it makes you make much better brandy hiring a guy who does this professionally than, say, using your grandfather's old still that no one really ever taught you how to use properly or whatever. So a lot of people, it's interesting to see sort of how the market reacts to that, because a lot of people, especially initially, are prizing the people who have their own still, because that means that they're true Armagnac producers. But do they necessarily make better Armagnac because they are the ones distilling, or sometimes it's better to have a professional do it for them because they're not really distilling that much, and so one or two barrels a year doesn't really make sense to have your own still. Then you have the step up from that. So these are the guys who are commercializing things around Armagnac. The Armagnac plums and Armagnac, blah blah blah. Maybe they do all this other stuff, and then you have of course the negociants who are buying barrels and blending themselves, and then what I call like the sort of aristocratic producers, the people who don't farm or make really anything else besides Armagnac and maybe a little bit of wine, and they have a chateau on the property, and it's a much more serious operation. So the experience varies completely from producer to producer. Within one region, even, you can have walk into someone's living room and have rabbit terrine on crackers, and then the next place you're having a 4-course meal with someone who's a baron or something like that. So it's an odd mix down there.
So I wonder if we could go through some of you brought in what have become some of my favorite producers over time. I wonder if we go through and talk about them, and you could tell me a little bit about each of these producers, and also what appealed to you about them when you were there that made you want to bring them in. And and by the way, people, if there's anyone I'm not mentioning people are interested in, they should feel free to shout it out in the Facebook comments, and I'll try to add those in. But let's start with Barillon. That's one of the early ones you brought in. One of the first brandies I really said wow about when I tasted it. It's an Armagnac. Tell us about them.
Yeah, Barillon is one of the most interesting properties. They are in a very high quality village, but they're not, and they are a well regarded producer, but they're not like super commercial. They have a tiny little tasting room where you sit on wooden chairs, and they cultivate all sorts of crops. It's the dad and the daughter who work together. Laurence, who's just had a child, she's just become a mother, which is really, really exciting. And Barillon is really old school. They have their own still. They do medium amounts of new oak, so it's not fully new. And a lot of the stuff that dad was doing a long time ago, but it's really old school. Lots of, their shays are these little super tight huts, pockmarked throughout the property. So you'll when you're tasting, you'll have to go to like 3 different locations, and they have these little caves, and they're all above, maybe not all above ground, but they're so that they're sort of semi-dry open soil. Barillon is one of those where you'll taste through 3 or 4 vintages, and like 2 will be so. I can't just like call Barillon and be like, just send me another vintage. Like, you have to check everything out. And then 1 barrel will be just out of control good. So it's a really high quality. I mean, their vineyards are excellent. And I think they're doing a lot of good things, but also, and they have very, very old Armagnac. I mean, he still has stuff going back to we brought in those like 1897 or whatever that was. That was so ridiculous. And I've always found that their best stuff is sort of 70s, 80s stuff. And there's some younger stuff that's excellent as well. Some of the older stuff can get a little wonky and weird, but they're a traditional producer. So they're doing 6 to 12 months in new oak when they can afford it. And then everything gets re-racked into old barrels. and normal ullage. So every 6 months or so they're reblending a vintage, and it's a really, and they're extremely kind people, and he's this wonderful tiny little man and just very endearing. But the quality is obvious. And what's great about them is they'll sit there with us for 2 hours while we taste through. They have every vintage in a bottle sitting there, so you can trace through 1879 to 2005 in one sitting, which is a bit outrageous. And maybe what we often divide and conquer to see where things are. And generally, good vintages will stay good, but you have to see where the blend is each time we go back. So it's a complicated situation, but fabulous producer.
So they still have a lot of that really old stuff. I mean, you brought in something from the 1890s, from the 1930s, and there's more of that. I mean,
a lot is a relative term. I think they probably supply some of the bigger name with vintages. So that's probably part of their business. But yeah, I mean, they do have stuff going all the way back there. I haven't been to Barillon 2 seasons, so I mean, we were supposed to go this year. We were supposed to go last year, but Laurence had just had the baby, Laurent, so it's been a little while. But yeah, it should be also there. I mean, the thing is, it's interesting that we come here, sell tons of this Armagnac that's amazing, but like, it's not as though there are importers knocking down these people's doorsteps. It's like there's just Charles. It's not like these. First of all, are they easy to find? Are they easy to communicate with? Are they easy to do business with? Not to mention, if you go there and you ask, do they have an importer? Of course they do. It's Charles Neal, even though he's not in there. They're not in his book per se, but he's their importer. So, then they have to check with Charles. Is it okay if I sell to this person in that place? And it's a complicated system. They don't really need to sell huge amounts of Armagnac to survive, because these people they're not running a commercial business the way we'd think of it, where they're feeling like they have to make lots of money. Like they're selling their brandy, and they're excited to sell it, but what do they maybe want to go on vacation in August for 2 weeks and otherwise fix the tractor, and that's what they need their money for. They feed themselves off the farm. So
you mentioned selling off vintages. I mean, obviously we know in Cognac a huge amount of producers sell to big houses. Are there a lot of the little Armagnac houses that sell to negociants or larger producers too?
I'm estimating here, but I mean, that's probably 80 to 90% of their business is selling. I think most of these small guys sell in bulk, and they only need to sell when they need money. The aristocratic producers, the really high-end producers certainly wouldn't do that. And they're producing usually much, much more. And so they sort of look at it as, that would be frowned upon to like maybe sell unless they really were desperate for money. But most of the people, use it like a savings account. So yeah, when you do need to, fix the tractor or do whatever, build a addition to a barn or something like that. Okay, well, we'll sell a couple of casks of Armagnac, at a bulk rate, which I'm sure is, calculated somehow. I'm not sure it's going to be like, pure liters of alcohol, €5 per pure liter of alcohol plus, €1 per year or something like that, or, maybe even less. I don't know. So yeah.
Who are they selling to? Who are the big buyers?
Like any of the big names that you'd in not bad names. I mean, Delord, d'Artigalon, any of these guys, the regular negociants, and certainly some of the bigger producers too. There's no real super large producers, but Lara Sangla and Tenerez, I'm sure buys. Maybe even Lobad for older vintages. These are the guys who have cash and have a road to market for their products, whereas none of these small producers really do. They rely on people for bottle sales showing up at the domain. Maybe they'll have enough money to go to one or two concourse or festivals a year and then go sell at the table to people who show up, which is another way to make business in France. But otherwise, that's what they rely on.
All right, how about Chateau Pelot? You've brought in a lot of their stuff over the years.
Yeah.
And they were here a little bit before you started bringing them in, but tell us about them.
Yeah, they're one of Charles's core producers. You know, they're really a wine producer primarily. They're one of the larger producers in making high quality, very high quality, inexpensive wines that sell very, very well throughout the world. And you know, they're one of these, maybe not aristocratic, but they certainly have this beautiful, incredibly large property outside of Montreal. And the Grassas are like super chill people. Yeah, we have good relationships with them. They do everything right. They plant, they plant Folle Blanche. They plant their, Tenerife is known for the wine because the soils are not as good for brandy production. Wine and brandy production, you kind of almost want opposite things. Where in wine you're looking for high sugar levels, lower acidity, more alcohol. In brandy production, you want lower alcohol, much higher acidity, because you can't use sulfur. And so they have enough property where they're able to sort of plant the brandy grapes on the soils that work for it, and the wine grapes on the soils that work for that. And they're very careful about that stuff. And they do a lot with Folle Blanche, and yeah, super high quality place. So it's very clear when you get there that they've really got their stuff together in a way that's not even clear with some of the other more high-end producers. Maybe are a little bit more stuck in tradition. Pelot is very, very streamlined. Very, they built out new shades and this new dry shades, and they've removed everything out of the old shades because they like the quality of the dry cellars, and 100% new oak. So yeah, so it's a quality operation. So.
And you mentioned there in Tenerife, which is one of the sub-regions that's sometimes overlooked compared to Basse-Armagnac, which is sort of considered the most prominent. Was there a choice you made to go to Tenerife, or?
No, I mean, the reason we spent a lot of time in Tenerife, partly because it's unexplored. There are a lot of small producers who are doing fun, unusual things, but also because Charles' family is there. So we were sort of based right there. And, his brother-in-law ran one of the best restaurants in Gascogne. And the village, we've become very close with the village. So we spent a lot of time, that's sort of the base. And so it's sort of easy to say, okay, here's a bunch of producers within 15 minutes of home base that, maybe we'd hit on the way back from a long day in Basse-Armagnac or something like that. So every day, maybe we're hitting 2 or 3 Tenerife producers just because they're on the road home. And I think often, Tenerife has a reputation for being quite rustic and much less elegant. And so it becomes obvious quickly who the good producers are, who understand, how the soils work and what grapes to use and what have you. So yeah, we've really had some good success with Tenerife and other ones that never connected with our customers. But it's a unique place. This is the Gers, and there's cultural differences as well between the various regions within, which do not connect necessarily to the lines of Armagnac. So the Gers has its own sort of subculture within Gascogne, and Lalande is to the west, and the borderline falls sort of just past the line for Basse-Armagnac, halfway into the Basse-Armagnac. So you have producers from Lalande in Basse-Armagnac and from the Gers in Basse-Armagnac, but most of the Gers is Tenerife. And it's culturally distinct from Lalande, which is it's interesting as well.
In what way?
Like like they like the way they do their bullfighting is different, and like the food is a little bit different, and the like little things like that. But you can the more you go there, you can sort of sense it, and they're very prideful people. So they're sort of that, like we think of Gasconians as a one group of people, but in fact they're even separated amongst themselves. So it's a really interesting place.
Another Tenerez that had an interesting story was Puchegu. Tell us about that one.
Well, Puchegu was like one of these total gems that we kind of like stumbled upon. We got there, and it's this gorgeous property. I mean, just super well kept, very, very, lots of, which is unusual in Tenerez, but lots of sable fauve. So this is the sort of reddish clay and chalky soil that is particularly good for Armagnac production. And apparently, we didn't know at the time, but apparently the owner was quite sick when we were there. And we found these incredible, he had very strong opinions about what worked. He was pro, oak, went into oak, it stayed in new oak, and everything he did was new oak. And he planted lots of Folie Blanche, and it was just a gem that totally unknown. And sadly the following year he passed away, and we spent several years looking for where the stocks went, because this is how it goes. The children don't want to take over. They have to pay the estate tax there, which is very, very high. And so the only answer is really to sell off the assets of the domain, which are the barrels. And Charles found it. David and Charles visited them. I never actually got to go to the facility where they're storing the casks, but presumably not a whole lot's changed. They did that. It looks like they've added the vintages together. So we're getting a new vintage of. I think I sent you a sample. Did you ever get that?
It was delicious to preview. One of my favorites since the original. Do we know when that is coming in?
Working on it. I just talked to Charles about it last week. We had a problem with the pricing, of course, because as soon as they figured out that everybody wanted this stuff, suddenly the price was double. So we're hoping to keep it close to what we bought the last batch. This is the rare Armagnac company.
That was the last batch, was the Mars and Venus labeled. Was that what it was?
Yeah, the Venus, the different vintages of the same estate. I don't know why they can't use the name of the estate, which is odd. Because they bought the casks from there, but maybe they didn't pay for the name, or don't want to use it for whatever reason. I don't know the nuances of the negociant market, but and it's interesting that something like that would go to it's a British guy, but probably the big negociants looked at his products and said, okay, either they're too expensive or they're too oaky for what we're doing. Like, well, we're gonna have to blend this in, to a bunch of super light spirit to get something close to what our house style is. So maybe that's why they ended up with this sort of unknown producer buying it, or maybe somebody. Maybe the guy understood how special that estate was, and and approached them quickly. I know Charles was trying to buy the stocks as well.
What were they doing with their Armagnac before you got there? Because if you Google Puchegu, you don't find listings of other bottlings.
Yeah, I mean, like all of these good producers, they had a clientele. So what they were doing is selling to restaurants, and maybe stores in the region. They maybe had clients who they had met over the years in different parts of France. But there was no attempt to commercialize it in the sense that we would think of, where you would get a distributor and and have your stuff show up in stores in Paris or anything like that. So yeah, they were doing their thing. People would come to the domain. Gascogne is it's rural, but there is some tourism there. There's this Chemin de Saint-Jacques, which is the pilgrimage from Spain through Gascogne, which is quite important and has hundreds of thousands of people walk it a year. So and do parts of it and bike it, and so there's a lot of people coming there to vacation in one sense. The sort of rural, rustic, hikey vacationing people in France, and so they may just drive up to the domain and on a summer day and say, hey, I'm from Nice, like, can I try your Armagnac? Or I'm from Nantes and I'd love to buy some plum jam, whatever it is. And that's their life. That's what they make their money doing.
Well, I'll look forward to when you bring in that new.
Yeah, it's hopefully soon, hopefully this year.
What about Cardinal?
Cardinal's pretty new producer. It's one that Charles has known for a long time. They're kind of an unusual situation because it's a young couple. They're can't even be 40, maybe early 40s. Her dad got sick. She had been living in London, doing like communications or marketing or something like that. Like, it has a degree in marketing she speaks great English. And so she came back because her dad was getting sick, and she hadn't really ever planned to really be an Armagnac producer. And they're very old school, farm driven style. Although from what I can tell, they're only cultivating Armagnac. I didn't see any other, maybe they do have some corn, I don't know. And so, yeah, they're kind of like, they were surprised, a lot of these small producers, they don't know what the market wants necessarily. So they have a Othenin-Girard come in and make their blends for them. So it's funny, you go in there and they're like, okay, this is the stuff made by the Othenin-Girard, and you can taste through it and it's all doctored up. And then, this is the stuff for you guys, the stuff from the cask. And it's all stuff that the dad had distilled. Because she came early 2010 or 11 or something like that. I forget exactly. But it can be exceptional, certain vintages better than others, of course, like any other producer, small scale producer. They're pretty classic in a lot of ways. They don't really have, they know how to make Armagnac the way Dad did. Like, they can copy what he did. They don't have really a sense of why or what we want in any sense of the word. So they were surprised that everybody loved that was it the 81 that
the really dark, syrupy, oaky one, or 80.
Yeah, for them, they couldn't believe we wanted it. And then we bought the last of it just this year. It's stuff's intense. I mean, only in Gascogne, only like the real old school guys like that sort of stuff.
So did you just say there's no more of that? That's
done. Yeah, that's it. We got the last of it. Although you'll see certain vintages have a lot of similar characteristics to that, and you can see where the 88 in 10 years might be getting close to that, and even the 05 that we brought in has a lot of oak, a lot of spice, a lot of power. So there's a good producer.
How much in the various places you go in Armagnac, how much cask management is there with the Armagnac? Are they moving things from, like in Cognac, from new wood to old wood? Are they re-racking? What are they doing with these casks?
It's sort of as you go up through the tiers in terms of like the level of producer, the more management there is. So someone like Pellet is going to be re-racking, aerating every 3 months, probably. So they like doing a single barrel at Pellet, they kind of look at us like that is meaningless. Like, there's no reason to do single barrel, because you can taste through 15 barrels and they're more or less the same. Like, maybe if you catch it right before they do Eulage, there'll be some nuances, but even then,
Eulage,
they're not. Which is the filling the barrels back up. So The
Topping
process
off,
based.
essentially, right? The barrels.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word. But they're not really just topping off. They're actually pulling all the casks out, vatting them together, pumping oxygen often. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the apparatus, and that's very typical in cognac. They put it through like almost a sprinkler system into the vat, so it really oxygenates. It's a way to remove the esters and soften the brandy, and then goes back into the cask. So maybe you over the course of 100 barrels, you lose whatever is 300 liters in a year, and so each year you lose 1 barrel or whatever it is. I'm sure it's way less than that. That would be very unusual. But so they'll take, only the only cask at the end is basically not completely full at all time. But they do blend them constantly. A smaller producer like Cardinal, maybe they'll do it once a year or twice a year when the Unilog comes to do the blends and helps them, manage that. Other producers, they'll never do it. They'll even I've seen, and some people believe that they shouldn't do it and like the style, like like with the Encantadas, the Loose Pibus, like they those are properly static aged, like in the sense that like Kentucky would have been. They were never blended, from what I can tell, from what I've been told.
They put them in the barrel and they sit in the same barrel until they're ready to bottle.
Exactly, and they're not moved. They weren't moved at least until Encantada got them, and then maybe brought some casks back to their Shea. Now they're taking the old Loopy Boo barrels and filling other brandy with them, I think, which is a pretty cool idea. It's wildly different depending on where you go, and of course everybody has their own opinion. So it's sort of like, either someone's like, this is what I've been told is good, or sometimes they say, this is what I like. But oftentimes the producers don't really like make too many quality statements about the practices. It's sort of like, this is how it's done, and that's it, even though everybody's doing something slightly different. So it's a complicated thing for sure.
How hard is it to find producers that don't use additives?
It's next to impossible. I mean, all of them will have at least some cuvee or thing that has been created by an Unilog primarily for the French market. But there are producers that don't use any additives. I mean, certainly the very top tier would not. 1 year is certainly, there's no reason to use additives. They're all vintage. They're not, well, mostly, but it's rare. It's extremely rare.
Is that something you've sought out when you've been there, or that Charles seeks out?
Because we're not really buying the standard lineup, like it doesn't really matter, because we can always get the stuff without the additives. So it's something we're asking often. Hey, is there sugar added to this? Like, I've certainly at Barillon, for instance, we've had instances where they present like a 10-year-old blend, and we taste it and we're like, oh, this is pretty good. Like, it's super sweet though for you guys. Like, did you put a little sugar? And they're like, yeah, the Unilog said we need to like add a little sugar or caramel or whatever.
And just that the Unilog is what?
Is the specialist of the wine, the consultant. They hire a consultant to do a lot of their, the reduction, the blending, these sorts of things. Just like they would hire maybe somebody to run the stills, not at Barillon, of course, because they have their own stills. But they've been told that what they're making is not commercial, and they need to do these things to get people to drink them, which may be true in France. Like, most of people don't want to be smacked in the face with a big, high-proof, oaky bomb. They want soft, elegant, supple, drinkable. So, can't really fault them for that. I mean, they're trying to just do their best, but certainly it's not what our customers want. Yeah.
And so, because you're getting sort of a specialty barrel or product, you don't have to deal with. You can request specially they not add anything to it.
They certainly wouldn't attempt to add, not without the Unilog there. Typically, that would be very unusual for them to add to adulter a single vintage of any kind. They know that we want it raw and high proof. It goes without saying.
So we talked a lot about Armagnac, but you've also been to Normandy to drink Calvados. You've been to Cognac, right? And done tours there. What tell us about each of those and what you found there and differences you found other than the obvious between the different.
Yeah. I think it. I guess Ghana certainly is a place that I've fallen in love with. I love the people and the food, obviously. And Cognac is such a contrast to it, and it's got its own charm. It's much more buttoned up and much more conservative, of course, and certainly much more commercial. But I find Cognac has much more mystery to it, even though Armagnac is I don't know, it's hard to explain, but Armagnac is hidden from view simply because people are out of the way. Cognac is opaque, you know what I mean? Nothing quite adds up when you go into Cognac. And every producer in Cognac and Armagnac, you say, did you add caramel? Yeah, they put the caramel in this one and that one and this one. You go to every producer says, oh yeah, we knew we never had caramel. Like
in Cognac, they say that.
Oh, all the time. You're like, dude, are you serious? Well, only just a little. You're like, come on. That's the sort of thing you go through all the time, but maybe, we add boisé, but of course there's boisé, there's good boisé, there's bad boisé, and there's, and I came into Cognac really with this sort of idea like, oh, I want to uncover the real Cognac, the raw unadulterated Cognac, and we taste it through hundreds of cask strength, straight from the barrel offerings. And the thing is, I backed away from this idea that is like that we can somehow change how it's made to get a better product. And I found that, yes, of course, there are great producers doing incredible stuff without additives there. A couple come to mind: Dudignan, Navarre, Pasquet, what have you. Although all of those guys, I think at some time have, except for Dudignan, have had to use additives of some kind for certain cuvées and certain blends, because that's what the market demands. You can't make a VS that's, austere and white, and clear. People want it to be soft and round, and it's just impossible to do that with 3-year-old Cognac, 3-year-old Cognac. So I think Cognac is much more complicated for us. And so it was really, it really became less about like finding special barrels and more about identifying a few fun producers and bringing in different lots. You probably noticed we don't do too many things in Cognac anymore because there's not that much opportunity. When there's something really great and old and unadulterated and high proof, it's expensive. It's going to be, it's 40, 50 years old, and it's going to be thousands of dollars a bottle. And it's like, that's not a thing that we can really work with. So, not to mention Cognac's much more explored. There are fewer producers that have not been commercialized in the way that Armagnac has. So that's very complicated. Calvados, Normandy is like the most incredible place, and I recommend everybody try to get out there. It's certainly a very different vibe than the rest of the brandy producing areas. Calvados is super underappreciated. Still, we have limited call for it, but there's a lot. There's a lot there. Making apple brandy is extremely slow and complicated, and there's a huge difference between good and bad in Calvados. I think that's the category of French brandy that least appeal to the whiskey drinker, because it's very much about restraint and nuance often, in a way that Armagnac certainly is not. but also it's completely unexplored, and it's a special place. Yeah.
What do you mean when you say there's a big difference between good and bad there?
Well, so like they use different plants, like a good, I'm not saying that you can't make good Calvados with grafted apple trees, but generally Calvados is so slow. I mean, it takes decades for an apple tree to start producing enough fruit to really make it commercially viable. And so they've created this system, Otige and Bastige, where you're like with grapevines, you graft the roots to dwarf rootstock, meaning these are dwarf trees that mature much more quickly. And so in 5 or 10 years, you get a tree that's producing fruit. You can plant them much closer together, so there's much better use of the land. And suddenly you're producing lots of apples within a few years of planting. Whereas traditionally you would need 20 or 30 years maybe to really start to see it kick. And I think there are quality differences between the apples that come off those trees and the ones that come off of the traditional rootstock, and not to mention issues with with fungus and rot and other things, and the traditional way of making, Normandy is the cow cheese central, and so you normally have your cattle grazing the land below the apple trees. But of course with that, which is going to change the nutrient character of the land, so you don't have to add fertilizers necessarily. And with Bastige, of course, they're much too small, so that a cow in that orchard would just destroy it. So it's a very different way to make Calvados. And then of course Calvados only has one AOC that requires the pot still, which of course you can make great Brandy with a column still. We know that from Armagnac, but it gives you a lot more leeway to do things more industrially than in pot distillation. So the continuous distillation.
Which region requires the pot stills? The Pays
Pays
d'Auge. I always let you pronounce the French first. Let's talk about just a couple of producers. Well, one that's interesting is the Hubert, which you guys sell for a shockingly cheap price of like around $30 for a really great Calvados. How did you find that place? And
again, it's Charles. Charles he's the Calvados king. Calvados is even more difficult to find producers than in Armagnac. In Armagnac, you can like go to Google Maps and be like, type distillery, and like most people come up, even the little guys. In Calvados, it's not like that. And so it's really quite spread out. It's a huge area. So there are probably fewer producers as well in Calvados. So Charles knows everybody, and he introduced us to them. And it was, they are a very high quality producer that's not really been commercialized in the States yet. We don't really get that many small Calvados producers. Like everything we see in the States here is like medium plus to very large producers. And of course, we don't sell that much Calvados in the States at all. So, when we say, okay, we want to, and I think that blend is something that we kind of created. So we have a little, it's a blend of younger and older and small portions. So you have this great balance there. It's just not that expensive I don't know how we do it. It's part of why we focus so much on them. We have the 2001 right now, which is just cracking. It's almost 18-year-old Calvados. I think it's $45 or $50 on the shelf. It's nuts when you consider how much work and time goes into it. But that's the world. Yeah, I don't know.
And that's the golden age of brandy that we.
I guess so for now, until we drink it.
What about Pacori? That's one you brought in that's really interesting. Tell us about that.
So that's actually a domain that I have not visited. That was a Driscoll original. They are, they were pair-based brandies. I can't speak knowledgeably about them very well. I mean, I haven't been there, so fortunately. Le Morton, however, I have been to, and love, of course. That's an underrated brand. Of course, that's in Charles's core range. So those core range ones are much more difficult for us to do normal direct importation on because they go through a distributor and an importer. So that's part of why someone like Hubert can get out there. If it went through normal channels, that same $30 Calvados would be $60.
Camus too is in that category, being a little harder to
yeah. Camus is in that category, although the prices are high in France for Camus. It's not the 3-tier doesn't help, but they have incredible price pressure and they have pressure, to sell more, but there isn't more to be had. So Camus is a very interesting and complicated place.
Do you feel like there are any things you brought in, any brandies you brought in from France that are still sort of underappreciated that you want to get the word out about?
I don't know. You guys, it's interesting. We like to bring in a lot of different styles. I mean, certainly over the last few years, I've been focused on trying to sort of press this this kind of like, okay, brandy for whiskey drinkers thing, because I think that's where there's growth and there's interest. And I think slowly we're seeing those people starting to appreciate the various styles, meaning like, there's a lot of nuance there. But a couple of producers in there, maybe in that style, like we had really interesting brandies coming from a small producer called Maum. I don't know if you remember that. I don't think we have any. We don't have any right now. But she's a really, really cool Christelle, really cool producer, super high quality estate, and it never really clicked with. Everything was at 90 proof, which maybe is the problem, but they're just really good and underappreciated. And then there was a great producer, Domaine de Jambon. I don't know if you remember those. Super estery, super oaky, but I thought really fun. Always with a little bit of savory undertones. What else? Gosh, what is there? I mean, I still am shocked that like Dudignon isn't like considered. I think Dudignon cognac should be considered, so special, and like the fact that we can sell 20-year-old Dudignon Vieille Reserve for $90. We do have an insane single cask of Monty coming, single cask of Monty. I believe it's 99 vintage. It won't be sold as a vintage, of course. It is cask strength, unadulterated Monty varietal, and it's one of the best cognacs I've ever had in my life.
From Dudignon?
From Dudignon, yeah. And I don't see like a lot of people talking about Dudignon. Of course, we don't get too much access to things beyond their standard releases, but
what about it is special to you? Like, what makes you
so Dudignon? I mean, not only the only cognac producer I can guarantee you has never used additives, because they literally like, we don't have the knowledge or the money to figure out how to do that, and it tastes good to us this way. But they're doing it the old school way. They, it's all open flame, wood driven pot stills, all super high quality in the very best part of the Grand Champagne. And their 10-year-old reserve is their entry-level product is $50 on the shelf, and it's just, I think it's shockingly good. It's not what most people think of as cognac, because of course it's very dry, and it's, I don't know, superlatively good, I'd say.
So tell us more about the Monty that's coming in.
So yeah, gosh, I mean, what do you want to know about it? It's the
Well,
last of this.
tell
It's an
us about
experimental
Monty.
batch they did. Basically, Monty is a grape varietal that was long forgotten. I think it did very poorly after phylloxera, and it's makes a super elegant spirit. We brought in a blend of Monty and Uni Blanc. I don't know if you've tasted that. It was we had listed as Napoleon II, which the French authorities didn't like for some reason. That's like not of the many things you can put on your cognac barrels. That is not one of them. Bottles, and then recently it came back as I forget what we called it, some other type of name. It was 15-year-old Monty blend of Uni and Monty, and yeah, it's unusual to see how how important the grape varietal is. It's not something we see really talked about much in cognac. I mean, 95% of it, maybe 92% of it is Uni Blanc, a little Colombard, a little Folle Blanche, planted here and there. But it's very, very special, and one of the few extremely well balanced, full strength cognacs that we'll be able to put on the shelf. That's not going to be. I mean, it's not going to be inexpensive. It's this is 21-year-old cognac from from one of the best producers in Grand Champagne, so it's going to be expensive, but not like nuts. Not like $400. It's going to be like $150, something like that. It's just shockingly good.
Do you have other stuff you're looking forward to that's coming in?
Well, not so much, because our trip got canceled this year, so we're kind of right now, kind of I've asked I've asked for a price list on the Barillon and trying to go off my old notes for the vintages. So you'll probably see a bunch of vintages that you've seen before, but now 3 or 4 years older. We do have a couple of things. We have a new producer who I think I've seen in New York a couple of times, Gilles Surratt, which is really, really interesting stuff. He's right next to Barillon and doing super high quality stuff. I think a 95 and a 96 vintage. And then, we were doing those really interesting things with Latérade, which unfortunately, I don't know if you've heard this, maybe I'm breaking news, but Feet and Latérade, you remember this brand?
Yeah, they were a bottler, right? They were a bottler that had bottled some Charon and other things that you'd released, right?
Yes. They are no longer in business, unfortunately. So we're trying to get a line on their stocks, but it seems that partnership is no longer. So voila, that whole we had selected 8 or 10 brandies from his stocks of 4 or 5 different domains, which were excellent, and those are gone, not available. Super sad. We have tons of then Cantata stuff still, and one of their producers. Well, no, I don't know if it's one of their producers, but there's a producer in La Fresh that I really like, that I'm trying to get Charles to work with. They've so far not been able to export. They keep telling Charles that they don't have the right paperwork, and I'm not sure if that's just a runaround, but so that's a domain called Guiamuta, which is excellent, and so I've been trying to push those. Yeah, they're all dry cellar, all new oak, super powerful, big boy Armagnacs. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Not a whole lot of other things on the horizon. Oh, we do have a Girard, the producer who does the Calvados producer. They aged a Calvados in American oak X whiskey, or maybe it was X Scotch barrel, and we bought that, and it's about 15 years old. It's quite unusual, very, very experimental in a way that I don't usually get into, but it's actually pretty tasty.
Has the pandemic, obviously you had to cancel trip, has it impacted you being able to get imports at this time?
Certainly France is very slow right now. Things are still moving, but yeah, much more slowly. I mean, we're very, very lucky that that Brandy didn't get tariffed so far, knock on wood, because I think one of the few things that makes Brandy so attractive is that the prices are so reasonable compared to what's going on in the whiskey world. And even an augmentation of 20-25%, I think would really, really damage the industry. So, I mean, it feels like I'm speaking of the choir here probably, but it feels like Brandy's super hot right now. But to be honest, like it's still a tiny, tiny part of the business, and it's still extremely underappreciated.
How does it compare in your sales to something like, single malt, bourbon, rum? Where does Brandy stack up in the spirits hierarchy at K&L?
Near the bottom. Yeah, it's pretty low. Yeah, it's pretty low. I think rum and brandy are similar. Single malt Scotch is 50% of our business, and bourbon would be close to 50 if we could get the products that we want, but of course we can't. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very, very small. It's growing, but it's small, and it's not growing exponentially. It's growing incrementally.
Is there a danger that you'll run out of the good stuff? I mean, that's what's happened with a lot of whiskey, right? Is that the stuff that was there 10 or 15 years ago isn't there anymore because the demand's so high. Obviously, you're not dealing with that demand here. Is that something you worry about for Brandy, or is there so much and it's...
I think partly. I mean, you look at someone like Camus and what's gone on with them, their only option to even keep any stock is to just jack the prices through the roof. Otherwise we would, imagine if the 25-year-old Semenville were still $120, we would sell thousands of them. So yeah, I think there is definitely and of course, brandy is an agricultural product in a way that whiskey is not. I mean, you can make whiskey all year long, every day of the year. With brandy production, you are limited to what you can grow and harvest, and you have to distill it quickly in a timely manner, because if it sits around, it goes bad, and you can't add sulfite, so the wine goes bad, and it's truly limited in terms of its production, and it's extremely expensive compared to whiskey, the base spirit itself, in terms of production. So yeah, there's a lot of, I think, the only positive thing is that the people who are making and selling it are, with the exception of Cognac, obviously, who's got this huge international apparatus, are really doing a pretty bad job of it, in terms of getting people interested in it, working together. The Scottish are really good at this, like sort of making all Scotch seem cool. Kentucky as well. They're not bashing each other. Not that Armagnac is doing that. They're not necessarily working together to. I'm sure there's the French governmental body that is in charge of doing this, but it's not the same. It's not the same as with Scotland or these other products, and I think there's a real disconnect between. And it's a problem in France. The French are drinking way less brandy than they used to, more whiskey, and so that relieves some pressure for us for sure. And the stuff we're after, and the biggest problem is the stuff we're after is such a tiny niche, such a small part of the total production, in terms of quality, that's the real, if the whole world figures out that Barillon is the jam, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem to get it. Whether you can get it out of them or you can, buy more than a bottle at a time is a different question. And a lot of these guys aren't really interested in selling their entire stock. Someone comes in and says, "Oh, I'll buy that whole barrel." They'll be like, "Nah, you can have 10 bottles." It's almost gone. So it's interesting.
And So on that note, something that we run into on both on Serious Brandy and just generally, I get a lot of questions, where can I find great brandy? And, my first question back is, do you live in California? Do you live in New York? Because if you do, then there's a pretty easy answer to that. And if you live anywhere else, there's not. And is this something like, what do you think it will take for other, like you're one of the very few retailers that seems to care about this stuff. Do you have a sense that that's changing at all, or what do you think it will take to change? And it's especially concerned since no one ships anymore out of the state.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think, there is this, it's not like if you build it, they will come. I think a lot of the importers and distributors are looking at what the stores are asking for and saying, maybe I had one request for Armagnac in the last year, and what they wanted was Tariquette, and voila, this is the one Armagnac you can get in Iowa or whatever it is. So I just don't think there's the demand in these places to make sense. I mean, the real answer, as you said, is to relax these shipping laws, which I think are archaic and designed to help one tier of the three tiers in a way that's completely monopolistic and unfair. And it's a terrible shame. So the only thing I can say to people is, write your state legislature. They are literally in charge of this. And there are enough brandy people, and it's not just brandy. I mean, if all the spirits people came together as a group, and right now it's the retailers are fighting legally to get this done through the courts. We don't have enough lobbying power to overtake the other tier to convince them that this is a good idea, to convince the state legislatures that this is a good idea. Instead, we rely on the localities. People need to use their political power to get their representatives to make laws that change the system, and that's the only way it's going to happen. When you look at there are certainly places that have set up systems whereby you can ship in, register as a retailer out of state, and pay the excise taxes and ship spirits. I'm not going to mention them, but that is a thing that could happen in every state were the people of that state to demand it. So there you go.
Well, thank you so much, David. I want to leave you with a easy question. Hopefully, when you have to reach for a brandy, which one do you most commonly reach for? Which few? Do you have any that are favorites?
So, I mean, this is such a lame answer, but I cannot not have a bottle of Camus Semenville in my possession at all times. So that's really my. I'm I've been there several times. And I say this often. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Camus is like the best distillery like of any kind in the world, and in my estimation. And the stuff they're doing is just so special, and it's so so that Armagnac. I mean, I drink a lot of Armagnac. It's hard to pick one. I've been like sort of going back and forth between like the big in your face Loup Pibus and these La Freches that we're getting from Encantada, and just like the fact that we can get super old Armagnac. Like I've kind of like gotten back into like this the super ethereal, ultra old stuff that we've occasionally had access to, and savoring the little bits I have here and there. So those are definitely,
I want to go back to your statement about Camus Calvados being like the greatest distillery. Like what makes you, what is so great about it? What makes it in your mind so great?
It's from top to bottom, they first of all, like it's these three younger guys. They refuse to change anything. They refuse to modernize. They do everything in such a way that's designed to improve quality and diminish efficiency. It's the exact opposite of a commercial production. They won't fill barrels more than 50%. Why? Because they want the evaporation, they want the oxidation. every other distiller, oh, but you have to, so you have, they're actually paying taxes on brandy that they never sell because their evaporation levels are so high compared to their competitors. Their stills are incredible. These very unusual double boiler pot stills with warm tubs, like a la single malt Scotch. The property's exquisite. 35 varietals of apples. It's just like, it's non-negotiable. Like, the quality level is insane. And certainly that can be said for a number of producers in terms of, the guys who are really, not compromising whatsoever. But there's just something about Camus that is so thoughtful. And so, I think it's in the, you can taste it. Of course, it's not something, everybody gets access to, which is a shame, but it's something that I can drink every day if I could afford it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David. Thank you for bringing in so much great brandy, and thanks for spending the time to talk to us.
Oh, Steve, anytime, man. I'll do this once a week if you want.
I might take you up on that.
All right.
All right.
See you soon, brother. Be well.